Tales from the Shadows, and how Dave Bakowski found an underground doorway to the dead dimension. My name is William Bill Owens III, and in this journal I publish stories of those who've encountered supernatural, paranormal, bizarre, and otherwise unexplainable phenomena. Benevolent or malevolent or benign, and who feel they can't turn anywhere else but need to be listened to. You may do with this information what you will. Tales from the Shadows, Issue 1, Dave Bakowski and the Underground Doorway to the Dead Dimension. Dave Bakowski is rapping a light beat on his floor with his foot. It is a nervous tick, as he'll explain, and throughout the course of this conversation, save for 2 occasions where he excuses himself briefly, that tick will cease only a single time. To calm himself, he smokes 2. Once he's got his cigarette, he lifts the pack and produces one for me. I decline. Then I set the recording device and place that on the little table next to my chair and turn it on. You know, what's a fact, he says. What's that? Started smoking the same day the foot jitter started. He places the cigarette between his teeth and lights it after a failed attempt and puffs on it and coughs. Ain't that something? Same damn day. That have something to do with why I'm here? He nods a bit. Ain't no doubt about that. I write this down and, without looking up, say, "You were an outdoorsman, right?" "Yes, sir. Never was one for cities. Closer I can get to nature, the closer I am to God. Why I chose to live out this way," he nods up and over to the window. From there a rolling hill can be seen on which this house is built, and at the bottom of its slope it is consumed by woods and surrounded some miles off by the eastern Appalachians, although those can hardly be seen from the living room. He takes a long drag on his cigarette. Started hiking when I was, 17? 18 maybe? Late high school years. Somewhere around there. Loved it too. Started climbing after that, and diving. Wish I could still get out there and do that stuff. But you know how it goes. The march of time. He nods. The march of time, yes sir. Throughout all of this, I notice but do not mention the fact that this foot jitter has subsided. Talk of nature calms him. The next topic will not. And in our phone call, you said it was caving, right? I think I'm quoting you as saying that was your final frontier. The jitter resumes. Yep. I was around 27, 28. Realized I didn't just like the outdoors for the sake of it. I like the thrill, too, you know. Not danger, really, but, he trails off and swirls his hand in the air while he struggles to find the wording. The adrenaline rush. He snaps his fingers. The adrenaline rush. Yes, the excitement. A little danger, I guess. He laughs. I smile. So how experienced were you when it happened? Intermediate. I've been doing spelunking for a year or 2 at the time, give or take. Mostly in big, safe places, you know. Carlsbad, Natural Bridge. Place folks go a lot. Realize the novelty wore off after a while. It was fun still, but not thrilling. Bingo. Can't be properly thrilling if it's been done before. Way I see it, anyway. He takes another drag that finishes that cigarette and without hesitation produces and lights and starts a second. By the time our talk is concluded, he'll have finished what was left of the pack. You thirsty? He asks. Got some Bakowski's brew in the fridge. You brew your own beer? Keeps me busy. He doesn't wait for my response. He gets up with the cigarette in his teeth and moves into the kitchen, and a moment later he is back with 2 glasses filled with a thick stout. I take a sip and hold in a retch and place it down. He downs a third of his glass in a single gulp. Trying to get the local farmers market to sell this stuff, but there's all sorts of licensing shit I gotta work on, though. I steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. So you said it can't be thrilling if it's been done, so I'm guessing you started exploring caves that were not as well known. Few of them were named, most weren't. Means I and whoever it was I was with got to name 'em, which was a neat privilege. Usually just combined our names to make it easy. Bakowski Adams, Bakowski Baldwin Francis Pucker. Most of them were small things too. Little one, 2-chamber holes in the mountainside, tall enough to crouch in, maybe deep enough to lose sunlight, but not much bigger than that. There is a pause before he adds. But then there was Baldwin Bakowski, and his foot jitter begins again, and with speed. When he takes another sip of his beer, this causes him to spill a bit of it on his shirt. He dabs lazily at the stain. Under his breath he mumbles, "Hail." Baldwin Bakowski, I say. That one on the map? He shakes his head no. And I hope it stays that way. So, how'd you find it? My guide was a caving vet named John Baldwin. Met up with him on a previous hack, and he tells me about this place he'd found all on his lonesome. Said he hadn't had a chance to explore the place yet, at least not past the 2nd chamber or so on, and he invites me. And let me tell you this, a place that's both unexplored and worth exploring, that's a rare combination indeed. So I jumped at the chance. We get there, we park a good mile and a half out, give or take, march up the mountain slope, and there it is. Just a little humble hole between 2 trees. Had to squeeze our way in. No wonder it went under the radar. For as long as it did, anyway. So in we go, and like most of the places I'd been in up to that point, it was real damn small. You know, we had to crouch in there, and for a minute I thought I got myself conned or something. Like, why the hell did you bring me here? There ain't nothing special about this. To avoid looking rude, I forced myself to swallow a third of my beer. That ready for prime time, you think? What's that? The drink. You think I could sell it? Yeah. Yeah, it's real good, real strong. After a pause, I say, so the cave was small? Well, at first, yeah, but that's when he turns on his flashlight and points over to the northwestern side of the cave, roundabouts, and there's a little gap there, a little cut in the rock that you could shimmy through. So he gets to work doing that, starts calling our stuff he sees, you know. Bend your knee around this rock. Gotta duck a bit, twist your arm to get past this. Stuff like that. And before I get inside, I'm thinking, hey man, you know, I liked spelunking for the quiet, the adrenaline, and exploring. But I don't like tight places, no sir. If anything, I like nature because it's the opposite of tight places. Wild, free air. Claustrophobia is for high rises. You'd never run into any tight caves? Well, I had, but like I said, the ones that weren't well mapped out, where I knew what I was getting into were so damn small, that even if there was a little squeezing required or crawling or something, you could usually see the other side. And usually that was it. But this, it was just blackness in there. Didn't know how far back it all went. He finishes his beer and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. But I'd already come that far, So I suck it up and I go in and I'm working real damn hard to not panic, Slow my breathing, trying to stay nice and relaxed. And he's calling out obstacles and I'm doing what he says. Get through it just fine. Figure hell, I did that. Had to squeeze and duck and twist, but I got through. Can't get much worse. Might as well keep going at that point. He nods and finishes his second cigarette and dumps its ashes in an overflowing tray. Then he lights his third. Went on like that for a while. Place really was bigger than anywhere else I'd been that hadn't been mapped out. Longer at least. Not so much tall or wide, but it kept going and going. Started losing track of time. Lost track of how far in we were. When you're working that hard, and boy, it is hard work, let me tell you, stuff like that just gets away from you. So when did things start to go wrong? His foot jitter picks up its pace again. We found a pond. Eventually we got to a little precipice. Overlooks a big drop-off. Over to the side of that is a small pond. Ain't no life in that I can see. Might not have even been deep enough to dive in, but I fill up my bottle at the pond before we start the descent, and I drink it. But then John yells at me not to. Tries to wrestle it out of my hands. I'm confused and struggle back, and down it goes into the pond, over the precipice. God. Yeah. There's a beat of silence while he collects his thoughts. Then he says, nasty fall, too. Big slab he was standing on weren't as stable as it looked. It cracks, it slides, and he goes down. Then I try to lean over to see if I can help him up, and I go down too, along with the rest of the rock. How do you survive? Ain't sure, but I was pretty damn banged up, I'll tell you that much. He bites his cigarette in half, turns in his seat, and lifts his shirt to reveal a jagged scar that runs nearly the full length of his right side. You see that? He says. Cracked 3 ribs, later found out. Had to wear one of them corset things for a few months. Felt like a real man in that. He starts to chuckle. But then I say, what happened to John? And the laughter dies, and he lowers his shirt. Couldn't find him. He flicks ash in the tray. Don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, he was nowhere to be found. Had to dig out of the rubble myself. Called out for him, searched for him in the mess, to see if he was buried. Nothing, which meant he'd wandered off without me. So I'd been real pissed off on top of every other damn thing. Did you look for him? He shrugs. At that point, I didn't give a damn what happened to the man. I just wanted to find a way out. He begins a fresh cigarette, his 4th by my count, and he says, so I just wandered off into the cave. Didn't know where I was going. Didn't know if there was another exit, But it's not like there were any way out from where I was, so off I went. Walked for, God, I don't even know how long. Hours and hours, easily. Can't imagine you were equipped for that. Had 2 granola bars, ate those. Had a bit of trail mix, ate that. Finished my water. Never did find another pond to fill it in. Luckily, the place opened up after that, though. Tight corridors became hallways. Little rooms you couldn't stand in without banging your head were now chambers, that you could hear your echo in. But I couldn't find John for the life of me. At least not before things started getting weird. In what way? He relights his cigarette and gives me a smug side look as he does. Then he says, "Found writing." I blink. "You saw writing? Is that what you said?" "Yes, sir." "In English?" He shakes his head no. "It wasn't any language I could identify, but it looked old. Ancient, even. Almost like those Egyptian cuneiform things like hieroglyphs." "What?" "Egyptians wrote in hieroglyphs, picture words. Cuneiform is Sumerian." "Well, maybe it was that. It was bizarre. Somehow, and this is gonna sound insane, I didn't know what the writing said, like in a translatable way, but I got the gist of it, and I don't know how. Don't make any sense at all." "What was the gist?" All at once he becomes visibly distressed. He fidgets and adjusts himself in his seat. Then he says, "It wasn't special, wasn't specific, wasn't like it was describing death and mayhem or anything. It was like, here, I'll put it this way. You know when you're a kid and you're afraid of the dark, but you don't know why? You see that like an open closet at night, or look down in the basement from the top of the stairs or something. You're 6, 8 years old. What do? You picture the boogeyman." Right, but why?" I shrug. "I would imagine because the brain wants to put a face on what it doesn't know, so it fills in the blank with possibilities that reflect your emotional state, tries to justify the fear." Good. Now get rid of all that. You strip away the zombie, strip away the vampire, the boogeyman, and what do you have? What's behind it all?" "Naked, contextless, faceless dread, I guess." He snaps his fingers and leans back in his seat. Exactly. I didn't read those words. Hell, I didn't even look at them directly. But when I was running through the cave, it was like they were just putting exactly that shit in my brain somehow. Like it cut out the middleman, Took out the reading. Took out me intercepting the words. Took out the ideas behind the words. There are just words covering the floor, the walls, the ceiling, all of it. And then there's that shit in my head. How do you put it? Naked dread?" I nod. "Like it, quantified death or fear and found a way to invoke that in you without you having to read it. That's fascinating. Fascinating to hear about, maybe. Being there, it'll drive you mad. I'll tell you what," he says. "At that point, it was less about escaping the cave, and more about escaping the words. It was torture, Bill. Truly, it was. Mental torture, psychological torture, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. I'd have much rather died alone, starved to death, or suffocated in some godforsaken corner of that damn cave than have to keep on enduring it. It was getting worse as I went, too." "How so exactly?" He pats out the ash. "Cave got darker as I went in. Don't know how. Ain't like there'd been sunlight for as many hours or days as it'd been, but still got darker and darker. Flashlight was less and less effective. I thought the batteries were dying, so I fumbled around and switched them out with my reserve pair. But it didn't help. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, that kind of dark. Gets right up there in your bones. It's intimate. And the words, I don't know. I got more and more aware of them. And what they're putting in here," he taps his temple with his right hand, Then other shit started happening. He clears his throat, and this rolls over into a whooping cough. He puts it out with a swig of beer. Then he says, I started leaving the cave. I don't follow. I was in the cave and it got darker. And then, even though I could still feel the walls of the cave, you know, and it got darker. And then, even though I could still feel the walls of the cave, the rocks, the floor, I started seeing other stuff, like layered on top of it, like another dimension. Can't explain it any more than the words, but that's the feeling I got, like it was in the cave, but part of me was somewhere else. What did this new place look like? Like a hallway, smooth surfaces, smooth walls, smooth floor. And I know it weren't part of the cave, because if there's one thing you learn spending your life outdoors, it's that nature don't make right angles, And if by some act of God it does, it sure as hell don't make multiple ones all right next to each other. No, this place was man-built, or something built. After a drag on his cigarette, he adds, nonchalantly, as if it were a minor detail, and there were pictures on the wall. Really? Yes, sir. Of? He sets the cigarette in his teeth and he says, it was the uniform from before, but hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs, whatever. But they were alive, moving, writhing, squirming. I felt like somehow they'd had depth to them, and I realized that, wherever I was, this new plane, this new dimension, it was a much realer existence than the one we're in now. Everything was so much deeper, so much more real. Everything here, He picks up his empty glass and turns it over in his hands without purpose. It's like it's just a thin summary of that place. Somehow I'd stumbled right on through, I guess you'd call it the veil, and I was in the real world. The one behind the illusion. I don't know. Did this more real version of the hieroglyphs provide you any insight into their nature? Any deeper understanding beyond an emotional response? Sure they did. That dread started getting in its own context a little bit. Something that's still alien, but it started feeling more focused. And the further down the hallway I went, the more focused it got. He put the glass down and stared at it for a bit, lost in thought in his own wordless musings. Then he said, anyway, finally got to the end of the hallway. Words were behind me. Guess they'd served their purpose or whatever. And at the end there was a staircase. Massive, mighty flight of stairs stretched off to the left and right as far as I could see. Stretched down so far there wasn't nothing but blackness there. Don't know what was at the bottom. Don't know if anything was at the bottom, really. But I saw that it was in the middle of that place. After an extended pause in which he assembles the words to produce, and during which the tapping of his foot gets faster, he says, it was a creature, a demon or something, maybe worse, and oh God, it was this mighty massive thing size of a planet. It felt like just watching me from the mist, from the shadows, and I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't run. I couldn't turn around, no matter where in the cave I went. Every single fucking step I took brought me closer to it. Realized, that I was still in the cave, and no matter where I ran in that place, it had no effect on where I was in this real world. Like some kind of, like a computer game character, You can move around in that fake world all you want, but you ain't never gonna leave the living room. What did it look like? The creature, I mean. Didn't look like anything that's ever been alive here, I'll tell you that much. It was, God, it was like a reptile, you know? Maybe just a little bit, just a vaguely reptilian thing, vaguely deer-like too, and shaped like a jellyfish almost, since it didn't have, a head or arms or anything you recognize as a body part. It was just this hideous mass, bigger than the moon and covered in rotten, what looked like tree bark and bones. I thought I saw old like rock formations dangling from it too. He gestures to his chin and to his arms as if something is hanging from them. Stalagmites and stalagmites, all the stuff you heard of in school. Dangling pillars of rock were a part of this thing, or an extension of it. I don't know, but it was old, ancient, and not like Roman ancient, but truly otherworldly, before time itself kind of ancient. He pauses for a bit to collect himself, then he says, "Then it spoke to me, Bill." "The demon spoke to you?" He puts his head in his hands and rocks back and forth and trembles. This time, his whole body joins in it, and he nods. "It spoke the same language as the words, and I couldn't translate it for you if I tried. Human language, I don't know. It ain't better or worse, it just different. We explain this world, the fake world, like we got a word for cup. Beer, TV," he nods at his television. "But that language explains, I don't know, the essence, the deep, the true naked reality behind the veil. And somehow, I just knew what it meant when it spoke." "What did it mean?" A tear rolled down his cheek and he groaned pitifully. It was calling me, Bill. It was saying my name, but it was calling me. The me behind the skin, the me behind the flesh, behind the bones. Oh, God, God, God. It was like 1,000 dead voices at once, just singing in this rolling, echo, gravely fucking language. And then I was with it, next to it, part of it. I looked behind me. I saw the stairs way, way off, like as far away as the sun is from Earth. But don't know how long it took me to get there. Don't know if time or space even had any meaning in that place at all. I was just getting closer to it, and somehow, for some reason, I didn't care. I wasn't scared. Weren't upset or happy or anything. It was me, but without the flesh or emotions. Everything was stripped away. I was just a floating naked soul. What happened when you reached it? I started coming back a bit, weirdly. Started getting feelings like, this ain't right. Something's wrong. This ain't real. It can't be. Yada yada. Started as just a little trickle of normal thoughts, like I was still in there somewhere fighting to get out, and I start to resist and it pulls me in closer, and I fight some more. By now David is staring off at nowhere in particular at all. He is in every inch as thoroughly wrapped in the tale as I am. Then it says something like blood or sacrifice or something. That's the closest English word for what it meant. Maybe it was the same thing in that language, I don't know. But I got the impression I could only escape if I gave it life. if you gave it life, like allowed it to kill you, or that, or some other life. There is a brief pause before he adds, and I realized that, that's what this thing was. This place wasn't the reality behind the illusion at all, but the opposite of reality. And this thing is the opposite of life. That's the only way I can describe it. The opposite of life. The opposite on the thing on the other side. And only after realizing that and fighting like hell did it start to lose its grip on me. And the cave started to come back, and the light, and oh God, he breaks down but manages. I didn't mean to do it. I didn't know. I didn't know. Oh God, no, no, no. I sit up straight. What? Do what? After a moment, he holds up his trembling hands as if he hasn't washed them in all these years of the stains of blood. It was John, he says. He'd been calling me, and I didn't know. John? Was the demon? He shakes his head. No. When I came out of that damn place, I was back up by the pond, and John was dead. Beaten into the ground dead. Broken nose, bloody bruised, disemboweled, and my hands hurt. And I just knew, that it hadn't been hours or days or weeks or however long. He hadn't even fallen over the edge like I thought. It'd been no time at all. John had been saying, no, don't drink that. Don't drink the water here. You don't know what's in it. And he grabbed my arm, and I beat him to death, Bill. I killed him. David begins weeping again, heavily. He drops the cigarette and grabs his head and bunches up his hair between his fingers and rocks back and forth. No. I'm sorry, I didn't. Only after a long time has passed does he sigh loudly and sit back. Then he wipes his nose with the back of his hand and grabs the pack and dumps the last cigarette from it into the palm of his hand. Then this comforts him to a small degree, and he lights it. I say, I'm sorry, David. Yeah, well, what's done is done, right? His voice is shaking. But he takes a long drag and produces a cloud that fills the air above his head and lifts away. Then he pats the ash into the bowl. Took John's keys after that, he says. Brought a rock down on his head, tossed him over the edge. Found my way out eventually, Drove to a gas station, got a pack, drove home, called the police, and smoked the whole damn thing while I waited for him. Thought I was going to prison, But when they got there, I told them John died in a caving accident. Tripped and fell over the edge. Weren't nothing I could do. And they saw I wasn't in no shape to be a killer, So they let me be. Left me there to stew in my fucking filth and in my misery. He looks at the floor. I don't know. Don't know if they ever even found him down there. Spent, better part of a year, maybe more, worrying someone would find my fingerprints on his neck and I'd be getting a knock on the door. But I never did get that knock. And by the time I was able to sleep normally again, live well enough with the nightmares, all the stress had produced this here foot jitter. He nods down. He ain't ever left me since. That was some 20 years back this May. I consider all this for a time and finish my beer while we sit in silence. Then I say, so, do you think it was the pond water that did it? Put you in a hallucination, made you attack John? He snorts. Thought about that, he says. But how'd I get the broken ribs? So, it wasn't an illusion at all then? Maybe not. I do have to ask though, I get the impression you've bottled this up for a while.
Why tell me now? Because I'm almost out of time, he says. Like you said earlier, the march of time. Thought I'd get it off my chest before I went to the deep.
I blink. You think you're going back to that place? Hell, Bill. Been seeing the place real vivid like in my dreams lately, you know? He pats the last of the ash into the bowl and laces together his fingers and places his hand across his stomach. Fact of the matter is, it's where we all go at the end to join our bones with the pit.